Welcome to the Practice Podcast, conversations probing the nature of practice. I'm your host, Dave Fearon. Well, this is part 2 of my conversation with my son, Dave, as we continue to talk about, explore, ponder an interesting suite of possibilities that Dave is raising about how our mind is working, even as we are doing something very normal and mundane. In the potential of us, there's so much more going on. For example, we may be applying a paintbrush to a canvas, inspired by something we saw on a movie 5 years ago. It's all in there, and we just keep bringing it out, including science fiction, the pondering of the universe. All of that in us at any moment is there to be applied in practice, for some good reason or not so good reason. So part 2 of the conversation that Dave and I had, where the physicist David Bohm and his ideas came into play. Why not? I mean,
why not? Let's
why not?
Yeah, we got 15 minutes. Let's do both.
Yeah. No, but I just interject here that we can look very, very closely, at an apple on the head of a boy who's the target of an archer, and we can look at it very concretely and hold our breath to see how the arrow's going to fly. But if you take it all the way out to where you're pointing past out to the possibility of endless possibility of everything, then that's something we can do with our heads. Is it true that there's something well beyond what we're looking at? Well, if you now look at William Tell, you can hear the music. Mm-hmm. You can read the original story if it was written by I don't know whom, but the fact is we can go all over the place with the equipment that we've got in our minds or / brains. And I think from a standpoint of human growth and development, mm-hmm. we need to not just entertain these larger, big guesses about existence and beyond, but recognize that even when we're shooting an arrow at an apple, some of that could be taking place. That the guy who's shooting the apple might have had this mythic sense of that he was infallible. Mm-hmm. And of course, when the arrow hits the kid, whoops, I guess I'll have to toss out my infallibility theory.
Right.
I'm burbling, but you've got my head going in about 75 directions.
Yeah, well, just hold on, because we're just getting started.
Okay.
So, I mean, I won't go too deeply into subatomic physics and quantum theory, but an interesting little connection that we could just leave as a loose end that certainly becomes intriguing. Okay. Is that in the brain, the axon and the dendrite are connected by a little gap, and the way they fire is there's an electrochemical signal that goes across, and they go to these little tubules. And many have speculated the size of those tubules being so small, the effect might be better explained by quantum physics than it is by simple Newtonian particles, because there's certainly electrons, electrochemical, it's fast, it's super small, and many have started posing the idea that maybe we need to know a little bit more about what quantum physics is to understand even a bit deeper how the brain works. But
Yeah.
I don't think we necessarily have to explain that to talk about to cover what we talked about so far with neuronal groups necessarily. But it's interesting because we did start with David Bohm, who did start with a model of physics, and it was one that was at the time, I guess we would put it in the material. Some call it it's a certain interesting bridge between a materialist point of view that we sort of been putting forth here, but one that takes us beyond that as well. He briefly what he called his pilot wave model. If you were to well, basically, it'd probably be best to look it up. There's a couple of great YouTubes. There's a guy who does a bunch of great physics talks I should have his name for PBS.
Mm-hmm.
And you could put that in YouTube and come up with some interesting examples. But basically, it's trying to explain the idea of like particle, like an electron.
Mm-hmm.
You think of it, you could kind of picture the classic model of an atom with those clouds, and the electrons are always at different levels.
Mm-hmm.
And the quantum idea is that the levels reflect the energy of the where that particle can be in its orbit. And the interesting thing is, if the energy increases, the electron doesn't just go out as though you're releasing if you were spinning a heavy ball on a string, you would just let it out by more string. No, it just goes from one level to the other with nothing, almost in a sense, literally nothing in between. There's a gap there. The gap, if you were to blow up the atom to the size of a basketball, that gap might be covering one state to the neighboring state, like one side of Connecticut to the other.
Wow.
So there's a lot of nothing there.
A lot of nothing. And
there's been various ways of approaching that. What David Bohm said is that what's really might be happening is that the electron itself is the explicate form of an implicate ordering, and the implicate ordering is really the wave potential, that kind of the cloud in which the electrons covered in, and what you don't actually get one electron. You get little sequences of things that seem like particles, but they're really kind of emerging from something potentially much more complex underneath that to some extent may be undetectable, because it may be getting down to the very smallest thing that can be measured, which currently I think is called the Planck constant. Sure. And we know a lot more about what makes up electrons and other particles. Are made up of subatomic particles called quarks, and then there's more and more layers in which you get down to things like string theories, which are thought to be the most fundamental things that are even below the measurable things that might have properties in the world, and below that. So, but what Bohm is suggesting is that there's really potentially we're not looking at lots of little particles, but we're looking at a wholeness, a sort of wholeness of which these particles that emerge in our world are the explicate part of. But underneath that is a sort of complexity that we've been talking about, including a notion of something that's more or less holographic, where lots of information about distant parts of the universe might be become at the different points, reduced to different points of view expressed by each atom. I don't know. I think I've got that wrong, but it gets rather difficult to summarize. I think the point one point that I just is just a suspicion for me as I read his stuff is that I begin to think that what he's talking about at the quantum level of physics sounds more like what we've been calling social inaction, and what Prigogine calls self-organizing. phenomena with this emergence, in the sense of observing that underneath the blankets of what we might see in the structure of an atom is almost a community of lots of complex interactions adjusting to perturbations, and so like for an atom to achieve an orbit or a spin around its center is actually almost a community effort in a way.
Oh, I love that idea.
So who knows?
I mean, if you take it out and out and out and out to us, and then out to community and social, it's an interesting take.
Yeah, and luckily, no one's figured out all the physics yet, so there's plenty of room for wacky ideas. And Bohm he has some fans, but I think there's probably more critiques of him than I think he deserves. I think he's, because often those critiques miss some crucial aspects of what he's talking about.
Yeah.
But I guess the point that takes us back to what people might think of idealism is that there's lots of room for very odd things like communication, ways that various parts of the universe are connected. That doesn't have to be explained by, atoms like billiard balls bouncing up against each other, where the only causality is that immediate visible contact.
Mm-hmm.
But that there might be other ways of connecting the world. I'm not going to conclude yet that it's necessarily a simulated universe just because we can't explain it. I like to hold that off until I'm convinced otherwise.
Okay.
But there's a interesting idea, though, that we can take when we think of the whole universe.
All right.
And where we are right now. And given that in the past 3 podcasts, we've probably given a pretty good idea of how brains could have evolved, probably on their own on Earth, although I don't leave out the possibility of being tinkered with by aliens or something.
Yeah.
But the point is, why weren't we tinkered with aliens?
Yeah.
And why might there be aliens? Well, there's plenty of other planets out there.
Mm-hmm.
The new not the Hubble. What's the name of the new space telescope that came out? I should know. It's operated out of Johns Hopkins.
Yeah. And they're sending signals back right now.
Yeah. They took a
deep. It went in.
Yeah.
So deep that it was looking at.
Yeah.
Billions of years of time.
And what you saw was just this sky crowded with galaxies.
Yes.
Each galaxy, billions and billions of stars and plenty of planets. And this telescope could actually almost see planets that are nearby. So there's plenty of room out there for lots of intelligence to have evolved.
Yes. Now,
another physicist, von Neumann, kind of addressed this issue of, okay, if there's such a big community out there, why aren't they here? And of course, UFO people say, oh yeah, so they are here. They're flying around their UFOs all the time. And even the Navy's now admitted that they've seen UFOs. But his point was, why, if they're here, why haven't they taken over? Why haven't they taken over every last planet and bit of rock and real estate by now? Because they've had billions of years to do so.
Mm-hmm.
And one reason you can kind of pose that is that if you did have someone, even where we are in our advancement of technology, people are already trying to figure out, how do we escape the problem of death? How do we live forever? Well, we upload ourselves into computers.
Yeah.
Maybe we're only 100 years or less away from being able to do that.
Yeah. Now,
let's say someone did that for 1,000 years. Well, in order to do that, you might need to come up with something called computronium that's built out of little bits of matter. It's not too long before you've dismantled your planet, your solar system, your galaxy into little bits to make enough computronium to live in, for everyone to live in. And then you hit other societies that have done the same thing or a different method, and they're going to fight each other.
Oh no, we're going to have a war over Confitroni.
Yeah, and given the age of the universe, there probably has been countless wars, and so why are we still here? So there's billions of years to solve that problem and come up with other ways of surviving, intelligence surviving in some sort of medium that doesn't rely on physics, on the normal particle macroscopic physics. And so we can kind of think of, if this has been if we're here, something solved that problem. And we could think of it as being solved not by evolving, but with technology, because that's what would have got some group there in the first place. And you could either have one mind who won the battle, and so there's only one mind in the universe. Mm-hmm. But I think I like to think that the laws of thermodynamics and entropy that we talked about would apply still even to that, and so that any one mind would suffer from entropy and come to kind of a heat death and collapse, unless that mind were able to divide into lots of
other minds,
lots of parts. Yeah. Or just let groups like former apes like us evolve and do our own, get to our own level of mind, and then get to the next level around the time where we might figure out, we figured out how to upload our brains into computers. At that point, it's kind of like the Star Trek first contact moment, where we find, okay, you've gotten to this level. Now you've graduated into something where you can, here's how you do it right, because there are a billion ways of doing it wrong.
Oh yeah.
And if you're going to be part of this layer of reality, you got to play by some rules. The real rules is that we should not destroy the whole universe, or the capacity to have this next level of existence. But I kind of pose that there would still be relevance for not having the whole universe being this simulation, but only aspects of ways of living in which living on real planets would still be of use, because in order to keep the like a universal level of mind intact, you would have to find ways that people will creatively potentially destroy it. That you'd have to look for ways of both living better but also living worse, so that some unanticipated way of breaking down whatever layer of physics or whatever it is in which this kind of mind or disembodied life can survive would have to be one that works the best of all possible ways, or else it would have already been damaged. And perhaps the universe itself was constructed with this technology as part of it. And it kind of implies too that it's not an easy problem to solve. Like we aren't going to, our physicists are never going to figure out where this potential community of mind might exist, because it has to be by nature hidden away, or else lesser advanced intelligent species would have found a way to break it. Much as we find excellent ways to break our own brains with drugs and fast food.
Yeah. Wow.
So
that's quite you've taken us through a very serious but fascinating romp, Dave. and I want to point out as I have to watch the time on this one, and we should do another one very soon, because we've got a lot more to explore. So back to the point of, what does this have to do with an action and practice? And my answer is, you and I are participating in a moment of social interaction, and we are creating meaning together. I don't want to throw too many words in because I know there's much more precise words, but we've carried ourselves through a moment of time, paying attention to each other. And in a way, I felt almost like even though I wasn't saying as much, a dance of sense of you're throwing an idea into words and out there, and I'm catching it, and it flows along. And part of me, some part of my brain is saying, what do you really think now, Dave? I mean, are you ready to let yourself think about, all the notions of a universe that you've just heard explained? And from a pragmatic and practice standpoint, if I said in my head to myself, nope, that's it. This is all craziness. It's all, it's science fiction. It's, witches and demons, all the other things that would, my mind is, as you say, folded up and is ready to unfold for this moment. We would discount it all. And wouldn't that be a shame? Would that not be a shame?
It certainly is a reaction of many people. Yeah,
it is. And I don't.
Go ahead. Yeah. Oh yeah. And I'm not saying that it's really just a Peter Vaill would call conjecture. That's
exactly what he would call it. And when he ventured into that way of building up what became the book, he was basically going against the grain of most people in whose social science and psychological sciences had composed what we called our organization science or field. He was not saying, I fully intend to debunk everything and place my ideas about something called practice in front of the world. No, he was letting himself enjoy, big E, taking his mind into this big question: what is practice after all? We use it, we talk about it all the time, but what do I think? And then he was very clear as you read through how he writes. Now listen, folks, this is just me thinking aloud here. This is me thinking. I'm thinking deeply, but I'm not trying to force any one of these notions on you. And it was always an invitation, and I reinforce it with what I would write. Let's give it some thought, though. Don't just discount the fact that practice is a social technical system. Don't just throw it away because of the fancy words. Think about it. Recognize how every moment of your life has an external interaction with some kind of technology, however you define technology. Right. So yeah, it is about, I don't say this that you're playing with your mind. You're actually enjoying the pursuit of the possibility of ideas that you can put together as your own way of seeing, the world, and then telling us about it. That's to me teaching
and making connections between things that ought to be impossible, but then you just run into lots of evidence. Yeah. Like, is there life after death? Is there psychic phenomena that seems like people can read each other's minds? Are there aliens? Well, there's a lot of evidence. We could all be wrong. We could all be fooled. But if you see lots of evidence in the pragmatist philosophy point of view, you start drawing together connections, and you try them. You see if they work. You wait till you try to knock them apart, and if they don't, then you've got one more piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. And I am so impressed that you can do that and in such a kind way, because you aren't saying, better listen to me. I mean, you may be thinking it. It is also a way of our contribution together. And if 5 or 6 people listen all the way through to this point, I would hope by then they're noticing themselves maybe in a slightly changing state of mind, sort of saying, these guys aren't, why do I want them to be crazy? What is it about me that wants them to be wrong? This takes us to everything you said about when we go past and start saying what the possibility of an alien presence and so forth. Why is it so important for me to discount and disregard and hit the stop button on this?
Yeah.
And they should think about that, because I think we're going to be, all of us, better at being human if we can stop putting our finger on the stop button right away and let lots of ideas happen in our presence.
Right.
I think we're going to be better off doing it. And we sure as hell need some new thinking.
Right. Yeah. Because what are the implications if we're connected in ways that are profoundly deeper than we can possibly imagine?
I'd be pleased and delighted, wouldn't you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
David Bohm was one of the things that kept him going under the adversarial responses to many of its ideas, and also Harold Edelman and Ilya Prigogine, who I've been talking about in the past, and I should probably find a woman who has this. Most of the women in this field will push back so that you don't even hear about them.
Well, doesn't that tell you something? That tells you something right there. Exactly.
No, I think they're
yeah. Well, and again, I'm watching my watch here, but Charles Peirce, the American pragmatist. We've talked about his story. In fact, I think you and Linda have stopped in his hometown a few times in your travels up this way, bludgeoned by his colleagues. I mean, they didn't hit him. They hit him with censures and, called him a heretic and all the rest. And yet, what I saw, as you've seen and shown us through these other thinkers, what I saw was coming through. There was a few people who said, "No, wait a minute here." And so they embraced some of that thought and they expanded on it, and they've tried it out, like John Dewey and some others. And eventually it's in the DNA of the, back to the last point, of some searches that we're undergoing on the nature of learning itself. Mm-hmm. And thank goodness, because it's kept me fascinated quite a long while. Mm-hmm. So let's find that next scientist who may be a female. That would be delightful.
Yeah, and maybe our next podcast could be a little more pragmatic, on less speculative. But I think we can keep the ideas going and look for new connections and dimensions that we haven't addressed yet.
Exactly. But thank you again, Dave. This has been a wonderful time. I've enjoyed every minute of it. We'll be back to you with microphone and camera in hand. Thanks for listening to the Practice Podcast, where we discuss practice with a capital P. If you'd like to hear more, listen in on Spotify, Automatic, and Apple Podcasts, or go to inactionresearch.com/podcast-page. And if you'd like to learn more about social inaction and the nature of practice, head over to inactionresearch.com for more information. Thank you for supporting this show. We look forward to hearing from you soon. Oh, and one more thing. How could I forget? The book On Practice as a Way of Being is available now in digital form, something that would be new, like podcasting to many of us. And it's a great way of learning more and more about what this podcast presented when Peter Vaill and I originated it several years ago. So please come to mylibrary.world/practice, and you'll see what I mean. Thank you.